Hiring for intelligence before integrity is not a strategy. It is a detonation on a timer. Warren Buffett worked this out decades ago. The behavioral science has since confirmed it with hard numbers. And yet most organizations are still optimizing for the exact combination most likely to destroy them. In 1993, Buffett stood before students at Columbia Business School and laid out his framework for evaluating people. Look for 3 qualities, he told them: intelligence, energy, and integrity. That order matters less than what comes next. This content is for educational purposes only and does not constitute financial or professional advice. If this channel sharpens your thinking on long-term financial decisions, consider making that commitment permanent. Share your core investment philosophy in the comments. This community grows more rigorous.
If a person lacks integrity, he said, the first 2 qualities, intelligence and energy, will guarantee catastrophe. Not risk it, not increase the probability of it, guarantee it. Read that again slowly. He did not say a dishonest person would underperform. He said the smarter and harder working they are, the worse the outcome. Intelligence without an ethical anchor is not a neutral force. It is an accelerant. Think of it this way. A slow, disengaged person without integrity causes limited damage. They lack the capability to scale their destruction. But a brilliant, driven person without integrity has every tool they need to dismantle a system from the inside, efficiently, creatively, and often invisibly.
Their goal was straightforward. Put a dollar figure on the true cost of a toxic employee versus the true value of an exceptional one. Here is what they found. Approximately 1 in every 20 workers, roughly 5% of any workforce, qualifies as toxic. Not merely difficult, not simply underperforming. Toxic. Actively harmful to the people and systems around them. Now here is the number that should recalibrate every hiring conversation you have ever had. Replacing a toxic worker with an average, unremarkable employee generates a net benefit of $12,489 per year. That is not a rounding error. That is the measurable economic cost of keeping one toxic person in a role, even before you account for the damage they inflict on colleagues, clients, and culture. Now consider the other side of the ledger. Upgrading from an average employee to a genuine top 1% superstar, the kind of talent most organizations spend enormous resources chasing, generates $5,303 in net benefit per year. Let that settle. Removing a toxic employee is worth more than twice what you gain by hiring a superstar. The single highest return personnel decision in your organization is not recruiting brilliance. It is eliminating contamination. Most hiring committees are asking the wrong question. They ask, how talented is this person? The more important question is, can we verify who this person is when no one is watching? This is not intuitive. Human beings are wired to be attracted to confidence, fluency, and demonstrated competence. We equate those signals with value. The research says something uncomfortable. Those signals are not correlated with integrity. They may actually obscure its absence.
The toxic employee, by definition, is often highly capable. That capability is precisely what makes the toxicity so expensive. It gives the destructive behavior reach, sophistication, and longevity inside an organization. Buffett himself understood this asymmetry at a structural level. His point was not merely ethical, it was economic. An organization would, in many cases, be better served by a person of limited ability and modest ambition who is completely honest than by a person of exceptional talent who operates without a moral compass.
The dull, lazy, dishonest person underperforms. The brilliant, energetic, dishonest person destroys. The difference in scale is not marginal, it is exponential. Think about the institutions you have watched fail over the past 3 decades. In nearly every case, the forensic analysis reveals the same architecture: high intelligence, relentless drive, and a fundamental absence of integrity at the center of the system. The talent was real.
The energy was real. The integrity was not. So what does this mean practically? It means that every organization, every partnership, every hire is implicitly answering a single question. Not how capable is this person, but what will this person do with that capability when the incentives align against honesty? That question cannot be answered by a resume. It cannot be answered by a reference, because a reference only reflects how someone behaves when conditions reward good behavior. It requires a different kind of examination entirely. The math has spoken clearly. The cost of ignoring integrity in the name of talent is not a soft risk. It is a quantified liability. The question now is whether you understand how this failure actually begins, because it almost never starts where you think it does.
They were Harvard graduates, McKinsey partners, the most decorated professionals of their generation. So how does a brilliant person end up in handcuffs? The answer is not a single catastrophic decision. It is something far quieter, far more insidious. Researchers call it ethical fading. In 2004, behavioral scientists Ann Tenbrunzel and David Messick identified a disturbing mechanism in human decision-making. When performance pressure rises, the moral dimension of a decision does not get weighed and rejected. It simply disappears from view entirely. Think of it this way. Imagine a dimmer switch, not an on-off switch. Ethical fading does not flip your conscience off. It slowly dims it, gradually, imperceptibly, until you are operating in near total darkness and calling it normal light. This is what Tenbrunzel and Messick called bounded ethicality. People act directly against their own declared values, not because they have abandoned those values,
but because, in the moment of decision, those values are no longer visible to them. Language is the mechanism that makes this possible. Watch how the words change. Mass layoffs become right-sizing. Falsified financial reports become aggressive accounting. Outright fraud becomes creative financial engineering. The act does not change, but the label launders it into something a decent person can authorize. This is not a theory. This is a documented pattern inside every major corporate collapse of the last 50 years. And it always begins the same way. Not with a grand crime, with a minor, rationalized compromise. Rehook. Ask yourself honestly, have you ever described something you did as bending the rules slightly, when in plain language it was simply wrong? That is the first step on the slope, and the slope has no flat sections. No organization in modern business history illustrates this more completely than Enron.
At its peak, Enron was the 7th largest company in the United States by revenue. It was celebrated in the press, studied in business schools, worshipped on Wall Street. Its CEO, Jeffrey Skilling, was by any conventional measure extraordinary. Harvard Business School, partner at McKinsey & Company, the architect of an idea that genuinely transformed the energy industry, converting a pipeline operator into a global derivatives trading platform. The man was, by all accounts, the smartest person in every room he entered. Skilling built a culture that worshipped intelligence above everything else. He hired exclusively from elite universities.
He implemented a performance system that annually fired the bottom 10% of employees. The official message was excellence. The actual message was winning justifies everything. When the real business results began to disappoint, the ethical fading was already complete.
Skilling and CFO Andrew Fastow did not decide one morning to commit fraud. They decided to use a slightly aggressive accounting method, then a slightly more aggressive one. Then they built an architecture of offshore entities to hide what the accounting could no longer conceal. Each step felt like a technical solution, not a moral violation. That is the precise nature of the dimmer switch. By the time the darkness was total, nobody inside could see it. The outcome? 85,000 jobs destroyed, employee pension savings erased entirely, and a 24-year prison sentence for Jeffrey Skilling. While Enron took decades to rot from within, another company managed to build the deception directly into its foundation on the very first day. Elizabeth Holmes dropped out of Stanford at 19. She told investors she had invented a device called the Edison. One drop of blood from a finger. She sat across from sitting senators and seasoned venture capitalists and made them feel they were funding the future of medicine. She adopted Steve Jobs' uniform, the black turtleneck. She dropped her natural voice an octave to project authority. Investors who had spent decades spotting frauds walked out of those meetings and wrote the checks. At its peak, her company was valued at $9 billion. The technology did not work. Not approximately, not in ways that needed refinement. It physically could not perform what she had promised. When that gap became undeniable, a person of integrity has one move: disclose the problem, notify the investors, attempt to correct course, or return the capital. Holmes chose differently. Tests were quietly run on standard commercial equipment made by Siemens, competitors' machines, while patients received results that were often inaccurate.
Rehook. Consider what this required. It required silencing people with integrity. Tyler Schultz and Erica Chung, young engineers who raised alarms about falsified data, were met with legal threats and forced out of the company. The system did not just tolerate the deception. It actively hunted down the truth. That is the final stage of organizational ethical fading. When an institution begins persecuting its own honest members, it has become structurally committed to its own destruction. Holmes was convicted and imprisoned. $9 billion of investor capital ceased to exist. Enron, Theranos. Two industries, 2 decades apart, the same ending. And if you think this pattern is limited to corporations chasing profit, researchers studying the United States Army found something that should
Officers who knew the truth learned to suppress it, not because they were dishonest people, because the institution had made honesty the more costly choice. That is the mechanism in its purest form. Ethical fading is not a character flaw belonging to a rare few. It is a structural vulnerability in every human being operating under sufficient pressure. It accelerates inside any culture that has stopped measuring integrity. The pressure will always arrive. The only variable is what you have built inside yourself before it does. How do you detect this rot in someone else before it costs you?
Yet seasoned executives and investors have used it for decades as one of their most reliable filters for character. It is called the waiter rule. Watch how a person treats a waiter. Watch how they treat a parking attendant, a receptionist, a cleaning staff member. Watch closely. Because in that moment, you are not watching manners. You are watching their operating system. The principle is precise. A waiter has no leverage over your dinner companion. No contract, no ability to reward or punish.
The power asymmetry is radical and complete, which means there is no strategic reason to be kind, only character. People who are courteous only to their equals will treat you the same way the moment you are no longer useful to them. The waiter rule doesn't reveal how someone behaves when it benefits them. It reveals how they behave.
The person who snaps at a server has already shown you how they manage people who cannot fight back. File that information carefully. It will matter. Now, here is something that should stop you cold. Research into toxic employee behavior identified one of the clearest warning signs in the hiring process itself: excessive overconfidence. The candidate who presents as flawless, unassailable, beyond reproach. Here is the paradox. The candidates who most aggressively declare their commitment to rules and ethical standards have a higher probability of being the very people who violate them. This is social mimicry, the performance of integrity in place of the real thing. Authentic integrity doesn't announce itself. It simply behaves. The person who tells you unprompted.
He gives students a simple exercise. Imagine you can buy 10% of the future earnings of one of your classmates. You must pick one person. Now, who do you choose? Not one student reaches for the highest IQ in the room. Not one. They reach for the person who is most honest, most reliable, the one who follows through, the one who takes responsibility when things go wrong instead of explaining why it wasn't their fault. Buffett's point is not subtle. The qualities that make someone genuinely worth investing in, honesty, reliability, the willingness to own their mistakes, are not fixed talents. They are habits, and habits can be built. Michael Jensen drew a clear line on this. Integrity, he argued, is not a moral philosophy. It operates like gravity. It doesn't care about your intentions. It governs whether systems work or fail. A bridge built without structure.
An organization built without behavioral integrity degrades, regardless of the mission statement on the wall. The mechanism is indifferent to your beliefs about it. True integrity becomes visible not when honesty is convenient, but when it carries a cost. When you must tell an investor you made a miscalculation. When you must admit you cannot deliver on a contract. That is when the real asset reveals itself. And here is where reputation enters, not as a concept, but as a compounding financial instrument. Buffett understands economic moats. A moat is a durable competitive advantage that competitors cannot easily cross. Consider how a mother chooses a video.
When partners trust you completely, they do not need expensive contracts to protect themselves from you. They do not need teams of lawyers verifying every word. That friction simply disappears. Transaction costs fall to near zero. Deals move faster. Capital flows more readily. Opportunities arrive that never get posted publicly. They are offered first, and often exclusively, to people whose word is considered as solid as a signed agreement. Buffett said it plainly. It takes 20 years to build a reputation, and 5 minutes to destroy it. This is not a warning about public relations. This is a precise description of asymmetric risk, decades of compounding social capital.
The compounding does not restart easily. Integrity is not the soft side of business. It is not of value to be mentioned in a company brochure and forgotten under pressure. It is the foundation that determines whether everything else you build will stand or collapse under the weight of its own intelligence.